you need to learn to get okay with a new kind of discomfort. You need to get okay with possibly not being liked, or maybe being unpopular, or the judgmental scrutiny of other people, or the guilt. Let's talk about maybe becoming a little more love bomb resistant. So given that many narcissistic intimate relationships begin with love bombing, and then by the time we realize what we are in, it is almost too late, doesn't it make sense that if we can cut this off at the pass earlier in the process, that we may be in a better space to not get into them too far, and then it's easier to get out. It's easier to cut and run after a second date than it is after 12 months. Now, this is challenging for a few reasons, but most pointedly, because love bombing is not just one thing. It can show up lots of ways, including, let's talk about those. Grandiose love bombing, gifts, flowers, really cool, thoughtful early dates, extravagant gestures, taking a big trip as your third date, lots of what seems like generosity. They pick up the check at expensive dinners, etc. They may be attractive, sexy, up for anything fun, and again, that whole idea of a fairy tale. This actually is sort of the prototype of love bombing. Then there's obsessive love bombing. This can include some of the grandiose love bombing, but also be the constant sort of texting. Good morning, my queen. Good night, my baby. I can't stop thinking about you. That sort of stuff that's coming at you a lot. You feel someone is constantly thinking about you. The thing here is that there is little anxiety about how this person feels. As long as these obsessive texts are coming in, you're confident that this person is into you. Then there's controlling love bombing. Now this has some overlap with obsessive love bombing, but this also may include lots and lots of time together, and they may then also want or offer to do things like pick you up from work, or drive you to work, or drive you to school, or pick you up from school, or want to start spending every night together pretty early in the relationship, or it feels like they've kind of moved in after the third date. And they always want to know where you are. Hey babe, FaceTime me from where you are so I can see where you are. They're doing this because they don't trust you and they want to know where you are. They may try to convince you to spend less time with friends and family, like, aren't I enough? Don't you want to spend time with me? I thought you wanted a relationship, kind of nonsense. They may playfully express jealousy about other people. Say things like, I want you all to myself. You're so gorgeous. So yeah, I get a little anxious about those dudes you work with. That kind of stuff, dangerous. Pay attention to this kind of talk. Once again, any anxieties about this person being interested, or will they ever text me back, or is there going to be a second date, that anxiety is also gone because they are always there. Then there is what I call I see you love bombing. This form of love bombing is the person who notices everything about you. And it may even at times feel really encouraging. They may ask you lots of questions about yourself. This may actually be one of the trickiest forms of love bombing to see as love bombing because you do feel seen. But sprinkled into this may be little bits of shade, some anger, some passive-aggressive digs, a few bits of gaslighting. But early their play is lots of curiosity and even what feels like encouragement and excitement about what you do. They may say things like, I have never met anyone like you. You are so interesting. I can't believe someone hasn't said that to you sooner. And these can really feel like amazing things here, especially if you didn't hear them growing up. Then there's the I need you love bomber. This is the person who's a bit of a project. They need you. They're like a fixer-upper. You give them advice, support, resources. You loan them your car. You let them stay at your place. You introduce them to people you know in your business, and they're so appreciative initially. You buy into their narrative that life has never been fair to them, and you want to be the one to turn it all around for them. So you listen to their sad stories and you become their therapist, their life coach, their closet organizer, and their debt consolidator. And in return, they start to maybe even blossom a little. And you appreciate that. You may even pity this person a little bit. And if your nature is to be very empathic, you may find that you want to prove to this person that they are lovable. And your compassion and empathy may lead you to try to find the good in them, especially during the early days, because they do need you. Then there's the grown-up love bomber. This is the love bomber who is very responsible and moral and has all kinds of bank accounts and no debt, and they're saving up to buy a place, or they already did, and they don't spend money irresponsibly, and they do what feels, at least financially, like the right thing. This is how the self-righteous narcissist can love bomb you. But you might see these patterns also in a financially controlling malignant narcissist. But that part won't show up in the beginning. But somebody who does this sort of grown-up love bombing may be somebody who feels quite seductive, especially if they come on the heels of you having dated a string of overgrown adolescents. And this grown-up love bomber may not seem shady. Hell, someone like this may not even have social media, which can feel really refreshing, especially if you were in a relationship with someone who was shady and gross and inappropriate on social media. If you had fiscally irresponsible or selfish parents, the grown-up love bomber can also be appealing. Or if in past relationships, you always felt that you had to be the buzzkill grown-up, the grown-up love bomber holds a lot of appeal, especially if at this point you're thinking about longer-term commitment, marriage, house, kids, that kind of sequence. The adulty feel of this person and their sort of seeming fiscal responsibility can mean that you see a future here. The part about them tracking every cent of your spending has probably not happened yet, of course, and their little judgmental comments, those won't show up during the love bombing phase. Then there's the offset love bomber. And what is this, you may ask? This is the person who comes along and is completely different than your last relationship. And they get double points and double impact if your last relationship was toxic in a specific way. So if the last person you were with was a cheap ass who didn't pay for anything, and this offset love bomber does. The last person might have been someone who made fun of you or makes jokes at your expense. This might be more of an I see you love bomber. The last person you're in a relationship was controlling, this person may not be. Now, how does this happen? For example, you may have dropped enough hints about your past relationship that they see what you don't want. And some of it may be sheer luck. Bad luck, but sheer luck and timing. Because it may just turn out that their love bomb game is simply an offset to what you had in your prior relationship. For example, you may end a relationship with a dull, socially isolated person and then meet a fun-loving, free-spending, generous, extroverted, grandiose narcissist. Initially, that's going to feel like a breath of fresh air. So the offset love bomber isn't always just trying to get intel on you and then chameleon into what they think you want. Who they are may just be such a contrast to the past relationship that you are just so relieved that you go with it. And then they have love bombing qualities, but those are absolute offset to what the last one was. These different love bombers play to different people. Some people are turned off by these patterns, some others embrace them. So what can we learn from this and about this? That we're not all uniformly love bomb vulnerable, but all of us are more vulnerable to one or maybe two of these love bomb types compared to others. To become love bomb resistant, you not only need to know what love bombing and ideally what narcissism are, but you also need to do this second piece, which is really the key. You need to explore your own blind spots. I guess we could call them scotomas, right? A blind spot is literally where the retina meets the optic nerve. There are no rods and cones, so you can see no images there, right? But because we have two eyes, the one makes up for the other, And so here, how could we psychologically make up for a blind spot? Here's where the knowledge about narcissism and love bombing can couple with knowing about your so-called sort of psychological blind spots. You can already see the patterns, right? People with abandonment wounds are going to be more vulnerable to getting stuck with obsessive or controlling love bombers, because all that will they call, are they not going to call, that stuff's lifted. Folks who love a fairy tale, they might be putty in a grandiose narcissistic person's hands. Interestingly, narcissistic people, they themselves are also vulnerable to grandiose love bombing because they feel entitled to a fairy tale. That's how two narcissists can end up together. But we have to become aware of our core wounds and our core schemas, the stories we tell ourselves, about love, about relationships. We have to understand how we were shaped by our past relationships and what we may still be craving from childhood. For example, we may crave being seen, or a person who actually shows up as a grown-up and is responsible. Remember, it's not your fault that you were love bombed. And you can learn from your history to become more resistant to love bombing, to pay attention to the qualities that are more at risk of drawing you in. So much of this happens under our conscious radar because these are unprocessed issues that are being worked through in these relationships. Some people will fall for the love bomber because they say, I love you, early enough in the relationship that after years of waiting to hear those words in other relationships, a grandiose love bomber dropping that phrase early on, or an obsessive love bomber dropping that phrase early on, can mean that they get a free pass for their bad behavior pretty early in the relationship. The hardest part of a new relationship is seeing the good, the bad, and the indifferent. The good stuff is risky because it may play on this whole love bombing trope. The bad can be glossed away, and that's how we can keep the relationship going. And ultimately, as I have said many times, we are attracted to narcissistic people because they are attractive. They are attracted to us because, in our fashion, we are great supply. We're attractive. We may solve their problems. We may lack certain forms of power, for example, not have that much money, so it would be more difficult for us to leave and we're easier to control, or we may have certain forms of power, for example, social status, which will make us better supply. The getting in isn't the issue as much as the getting stuck. I've said this many times, because that's where issues like trauma bonding come into play. But to the degree we can also address the getting in by doing a sort of self-study on what core issues and wounds that we bring into a relationship, the more we can figure out which of these love bombing patterns can do a number on us. Dating advice rarely entails doing a deep dive on your schemas, narratives, wounds, traumas, and past relationships. But it makes a lot more sense than checklists and knowing what we want in a partner. You better know who you are first, because understanding some of this can help you understand why a controlling, emotionally harmful person was able to get such a toehold in your life, or that a person with Excel spreadsheets of their financial goals seemed hot. When we understand how these old demons come out to play for us, we may be able to open our eyes and those blind spots to the bad patterns as well. And we learn that the spreadsheet or the good morning texts are what they are, but that the gaslighting or the manipulation or the judgment or the betrayal are never okay. And there is no picnic on the beach, no 20-year plan, no good night text, no Instagram perfect relationship that can be an offset to being made to feel not enough in a relationship. Doing these deep dives with ourselves allows us to be honest with ourselves and ultimately to become more narcissist resistant. Good luck, and remember, love bombing ain't always a good time. Sometimes fairy tales look a hell of a lot different than you think. So here's a question for us to think on. Has all of us learning so much more about gaslighting made the world a better place? Now, someone on my team put this question to me. Asked me the basic question, is the world better off for knowing about gaslighting? I asked her what she thought, and her feeling was yes. And I thought about it, and I agreed with her, but with a little bit of a disclaimer. But she is sort of right. And I'm not even sure I would say the world is a better place than it is a slightly wiser place. Once upon a time, the word gaslighting, I mean, even I'd say 15 to 20 years ago, that word gaslighting was something that was maybe used by therapists, old movie buffs, some philosophers, and a few journalists. In fact, you can even pause the video in a moment when you think about it, but take a moment and think about the first time you heard this word gaslighting. When was that? And what was the context? How did it affect you? I know for me it was about 30 years ago when I was in therapy. And my therapist used the word, and I had never heard it before. She was applying it to a family situation and a relationship situation I was in. And while I intellectually got it, it took me a long time for me to fully get what it meant. I wasn't ready the first time she taught me about gaslighting, and it would be many, many years later when there were more books and information about how this dynamic shows up in relationships. Once upon a time, that kind of education didn't exist. So in the past 10 to 15 years, as social media has given us very different kinds of platforms to talk about relationships and mental health, and of course narcissism, in a very different way, we are hearing this word gaslighting used much more often. And as the political climate, not only in the United States, but around the world, has shifted and become more polarized, and media has also become more siloed, we also see that this term is getting more and more popular use. And people are actually more aware in real time, or maybe right thereafter, when they are being gaslighted. And I personally think that awareness, that's a good thing. I don't think it's a good thing that we're seeing more of it, but it's a good thing when you're aware of it. When you know you're being gaslighted, especially as it's happening, initially it sucks, but ultimately that knowledge becomes your salvation. For the longest time, people were gaslighted and they didn't understand it. So people who had less power in their relationships or were more subordinate in their jobs or in their companies, where they had awful bosses or had a narcissistic or toxic parent who controlled them, they were made to feel smaller and more foolish and dumb and whatever in their narcissistic relationships because they didn't have the language to understand what was happening, to recognize, oh, this is a maneuver, that my reality is being denied so they can dominate and dismantle. We didn't know, and interestingly, even though the film Gaslight came out in the late 1930s, translating that dynamic of gaslighting in that film into what was actually happening in people's relationships back then wasn't a thing. The film was just being viewed as a sort of psychological thriller and not what people believed was actually happening in people's lives, which then it was a lot. Now, with more and more people now acutely aware that they are being gaslighted in real time, like in the macro, that is a good thing, because I definitely think it uncrazies people. It lets them pause and say, whoa, 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 that is not what I said. That is not what I did. And as people learn more about it, they learn all of the various maneuvers that comprise gaslighting, including things like deflection or blame shifting, playing the victim, all of it. There is also a secondary benefit that now that more people understand gaslighting, that when a person witnesses someone else being gaslighted, that they may step in. Just as my therapist did all those years ago when I told her about something, she said, oh, you were gaslighting. And that third party who's watching what you're going through or listening to what you're going through and says, yo, you're being gaslighted. One of the most healing things that can happen is when someone pulls you out of a confused gaslighting spiral. And if people get it, then it's going to extend to how they also extend that knowledge to other people. All of this is good stuff. Part of the challenge is, just like narcissism, gaslighting is still quite misunderstood. We make the mistake of thinking that when someone's lying to us that they're gaslighting us. No, lies are lies. That's different. We think that someone having a different opinion from us is gaslighting, and that's not true. It's just a difference in opinion. Now, if that person has a difference of opinion from you and then says, nope, you're wrong, your opinion's wrong, you're stupid for having that opinion, and you've been brainwashed, and that's why you have that opinion, then that's gaslighting. Being told that you have no right to feel a certain way, for example, someone saying to you, you can't be angry about that, that's gaslighting. It's also gaslighting when a person tells you that you do feel a certain way. When a person says, well, why are you angry at me? When you're not. That's gaslighting. Now, telling someone that they are remembering something wrong that didn't happen, for example, that may be gaslighting, but that has to be backed with them also implying that there's something wrong with you. For example, them saying, you aren't remembering that night right, but you don't remember anything right these days. Your memory's a mess and you're getting more paranoid all the time. That's gaslighting. See, there's sort of layers to this. When gaslighting happens, and we understand it's happening, it is a good thing. But then when it does happen, there's the bigger question of what exactly are we supposed to do with that knowledge? Because the things you cannot do include saying, hey, stop gaslighting me, or you're gaslighting me. Don't do that. Or certainly you don't want to say to them, you're a narcissist. All of that's off the table. And it'll end up with you just being more gaslighted. What you can do is pay attention. If someone gaslights you, and it's the first time, you can try what I call the healthy response, which is really a bit of a test, and say something like, it depends on what their nature of their gaslighting is, but maybe say something like, hey, I think we're having different experiences here. Or, I am angry. It's how I feel now. I don't need to provide evidence for my feelings. Or, please don't tell me how I feel. I'm happy to share with you how I feel if you ask me. Those kinds of things. Sane sorts of feedback. Now, if you're truly being toxically gaslighted, like narcissism level stuff, that other person who's gaslighting you will double down. They might make fun of you, roll their eyes, be dismissive, and say something like, well, your memory's wrong, or your recollection is wrong, or your experience is wrong. And when that happens, when the gaslighter gives you that kind of pushback, that's it. Now you know for sure you are dealing with a gaslighter, and no, you cannot remediate them, you cannot educate them, you cannot teach them. You have to change how you interact with them going forward and recognize that this is what they do. They gaslight. At the core of it, gaslighting is a power move. It's a way for gaslighters to exert their reality and dismantle the person that they are gaslighting. This gives the gaslighter more power and control and leaves the other person in the relationship confused and self-doubting. Do some people gaslight when they're defensive or when their back is against the wall? Sure. But then, if they're not narcissistic, or this is just a one defensive maneuver thing, if you give them a chance, the first time they gaslight you and they double down, then you know this is more than just defensiveness, right? But if they're actually willing to hear it out and step back, maybe it's not. Sometimes people will gaslight from a place of self-protection and not a place of dismantling. You caught them in a lie, or you caught them in something bad, and they want to still find their self-preserving out. So they lie to the very end when they finally cop to it, right? I am a firm believer that knowledge and education are power, especially when it comes to toxic relationships. And understanding gaslighting and narcissism and manipulation and future faking and betrayal and all of it, it isn't meant to make life into an us versus them. It isn't meant to result in you going no contact with everyone you know. Knowing this stuff is meant to help you become more discerning, to engage with people differently, to be more careful with people who aren't entirely psychologically safe. It's less an indictment of the other person than it is a fortifying of your own reality. And if more people getting it means that maybe more people will be able to dodge toxic relationships earlier or stop wasting time in that tango with toxic family members, then fantastic. It can mean getting back or never losing lots of wasted time and broken hearts and just feeling crazy. So sure, maybe the world understanding and getting gaslighting makes it feel like a more precarious place, and sure, some people misuse it. But when you do get it, when it's happening to you in real time and you do get it, you have a moment of clarity and sanity that is often exactly what gaslighting takes away from us. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm always making this suggestion to you, but I'm aware that it's not so easy. So why are boundaries so hard to set, especially for people who are in any kind of narcissistic relationship? I know that some of you hear this guidance, or many of you hear this guidance, not just from me, but from everybody who talks about toxic relationships, that one of the most important tools in managing narcissists is boundaries. Honestly, it's one of the most important tools in life. But if you can master that, then you got your narcissist all figured out. So if it's so simple, then why is it so difficult? There are two simple reasons that boundaries are so hard to set. And interestingly, they are also part of the reason you got stuck in a relationship with a narcissist in the first place and why you remain stuck in it for a very long time. What are these two reasons? Number one, you are worried about other people's reactions and what other people will think if you set a boundary. Your fear is if you set a boundary, people will not like it. They're going to think that you're not a very nice person. Even the people in your life who are not narcissistic. Let's view it simply. In the most simple version of a boundary, what is it? It's about saying no. It's about not giving in. It's about not giving up too much, not agreeing to something you cannot do, not agreeing to something that makes you uncomfortable, not overextending. Think of the last time, really, think about the last time you set a boundary. Share it in the comments if you want. What was that boundary about? I know for me that the most recent boundary I had to set was a few days ago, and I had to say no to something. It was very uncomfortable. And I know I let someone down. But on that day, I happened to be exhausted, and I knew I was kind of burned out. And the person asking me of this thing I needed to do was incredibly entitled. Did I sit with this discomfort for a few minutes? Yeah. And after about 30 minutes, that discomfort left. I was relieved and I had a better day as a result. But in my case, it was easier because there was no one else who knew I was setting the boundary. When there's other people involved, it's really hard. The other issue is not just feeling like you're letting down one person, but again, it's that bigger idea of how will other people view you. There is often the concern that other people will either view you as lazy or as a flake or as not a team player, or just that anxious feeling that people are not going to like me because I set a boundary. That concern that you will be judged harshly is why so many people keep giving in to doing too much, usually for the toxic people who just keep asking for more. There is an ancient quote by Lao Tzu who said, "Care what other people think, and you will forever be their prisoner." That quote could not be more true when it comes to setting boundaries. We are never fully going to live in a world where we never care about what other people think. But we tend to put too much importance on that when it comes to boundary setting, and then we don't end up setting the boundaries. And finally, because so many people out there feel like they are not enough, they just keep doing and doing and doing for other people, thinking that there's a point they can reach where they'll feel like they're enough. They can fix that. It's never enough for other people, especially for narcissistic people. So feeling like you're not enough, That's on you to address. Doing stuff for other people ain't gonna address that. The big issue here is that these very qualities in ourselves are caring too much about what other people think, being afraid of letting other people down, feeling like you have to keep rescuing or doing stuff for other people, feeling like you're not enough, not liking the feeling of letting other people down, is literally exactly part of what made you so vulnerable to a narcissistic relationship and perhaps found it so hard to get out, or maybe you're still in it. Toxic people take and take and take. They don't have the empathy to care. They're deeply entitled. So they're never going to stop and take stock and wonder if they are asking too much of someone. In fact, it's more likely that they simply view you as a convenience, an object to fulfill their needs. So they aren't going to wonder if they are asking too much of you. And if you care what they think and never set a boundary, then you will be living life as a bottomless well that keeps serving their needs. You're the only one who can stop this cycle. That's a boundary. The second thing, what is it? The second thing that makes it so difficult to set boundaries? It's guilt. This relates quite strongly to the first point, but guilt is the idea, and I should say the emotion associated with the feeling that you've done something wrong. And in this case, you've done something wrong by saying no, or that you can't, or you won't do something, or simply you don't want to do something. Guilt about saying no is how people double down on all of this stress. But guilt is one of the strongest glues that keep people in any kind of narcissistic relationship. I feel guilty I didn't visit my mother even though she's always criticizing me. I feel guilty I am not more supportive of my partner. I feel guilty I didn't give my son the ride he asked for. I feel guilty I didn't sign up to do the extra evaluations at work. Guilt is very uncomfortable and we don't like it. So many times it is easier to give in and do the visit to your mom and have the same time-wasting conversation with your partner, or give your son the ride, or do the extra work, than to set the boundary and endure the discomfort of the guilt. Many of us were taught from an early age by either watching parents in a dysfunctional marriage or just by how your dysfunctional family system worked, that to not go along to get along meant that you were the problem. That setting a boundary was simply not an option. It was highly enmeshed and nobody was setting boundaries. We actually do a terrible job at teaching kids to set boundaries in a healthy manner. Now, obviously, there are some things that they need to do. We all need to do. They need to do their chores. They need to brush their teeth. They need to fulfill their school requirements or make their bed. But go beyond that. Sometimes we force kids to play with kids who make them uncomfortable, or do extra activities like sports that they don't want to play, or instruments that they don't want to learn because the parent wants them to play the sport or be friends with their friend's child. The child may not want these things, and that child may not feel that he or she can say no. If the child finally finds the courage to say no, they will often face a world of guilt and hurt from a narcissistic parent. After all I do for you, you just won't play soccer or spend time with me or spend the entire weekend with the family, even though, of course, the damn family is scapegoating this child. The child doesn't learn boundaries or is guilted for setting them. So you can imagine that association of guilt and boundary will then stream into adulthood. The reason that learning how to set boundaries, especially with manipulative and narcissistic people, is so difficult, is that you need to learn to get okay with a new kind of discomfort. You need to get okay with possibly not being liked, or maybe being unpopular, or the judgmental scrutiny of other people, or the guilt. Assuming that your boundaries are appropriate. For example, you aren't saying, hey, I'm coming to work, but I'm not going to do what you're paying me to do. Well, obviously, that's not going to fly. But assuming that you're setting boundaries in reasonable ways, not taking on extra work you don't have the time for, or going to places where you will be facing criticism or gaslighting, or just not wanting to do something optional because you're exhausted or simply just want to attend to other caregiving duties you have at home, then it's about understanding that setting boundaries sets a tone. The key, and this isn't always possible, especially with parents or siblings or relationships you didn't choose, is to do the boundary setting on the front end. But since most of you watching this are already fully mired in your narcissistic relationships, this becomes about starting to set those boundaries now, today, to start learning to get okay with the discomfort. I got to tell you, you're choosing between two evils, two difficult situations. But one of them may just be a feeling that you're constructing for yourself, that discomfort, that if I set this boundary, nobody's going to like me. If the people you know or work with or whatever are able to reject you that quickly just for setting a boundary, they really aren't that healthy for you. And in fact, you may be doing the thing that other people are not comfortable doing, which is setting that line. And if they're willing to dump you, well, then they really weren't that in the first place. Boundary setting can also be more difficult if you are not empowered in a given situation. For example, as a function of race, or the amount of money you have, or gender, or some other status that disempowers you. Boundaries are often a privilege of the privileged. But there are a million small ways you can still set them, even if you lack that privilege. Give yourself permission to leave when a conversation becomes taxing, or mentally cut out and go to some happy place in your mind. Use your silence as a boundary. Gray rocking is also a form of boundary. Disengaging is a form of boundary setting. This can be a million small ways that you do this. So I'm well aware when I say, hey everyone, here's a thought for managing a narcissist, just set a boundary, that may very well set off a whole series of uncomfortable psychological experiences for you. It's not as easy as just saying, no, I'm not going to do that. It's a trade-off. But in the long term, getting comfortable with your own discomfort can end up being far better for your mental health than a lifetime of just giving in to entitled and difficult people. Try it in a small way this week. Try one little boundary and see how it works out for you. Again, it's often baby steps. You may have been not able to set boundaries for a lifetime. Rome wasn't built in a day, and you're not going to build huge boundaries in a week. But you can start somewhere. As someone who just had to set a very uncomfortable boundary in the last 48 hours, I got to tell you, that discomfort, it hits you hard. It hits you right here. All those old voices hit you. But if you give yourself a minute, you'll see that discomfort doesn't kill you. And then there's a new feeling that floods you, which is relief that, oh my goodness, I feel really relieved that I did not agree to do that thing that's just going to leave me feeling resentful and frustrated. How do you become more hooverproof? Hoovering is something that often, but not always, happens in toxic, narcissistic, or other forms of unhealthy relationships. Hoovering merely means getting sucked back in after a breakup or a betrayal or some other pause in the relationship. Hoovering specifically refers to a sort of love bomb part 2 or part 3 or part 4 or part 5 with a fair amount of future faking thrown in. Hoovering is usually initiated by the narcissistic person, but in some cases, the person who was hurt by the narcissistic person may initiate the hoover by sending something like a birthday text or a "you won't believe this" text to see if they can re-engage because they still haven't resolved their feelings about the relationship. And yes, In some cases, more than just some cases, people are not hoovered, which can raise its own form of grief, as people will wonder, was I not even good enough to hoover? It's not about not being good enough. I have to say you were lucky, but it's hard to see it that way when it's happening to you and you're still sort of going through the healing and resolution process. There are lots of reasons that hoovering works. After going through the desolation and invalidation and not being seen or heard in the relationship, when they now newly show up with new attention and love bombing, it can feel like a wish come true that you had while you were in the relationship with them. It can stoke that hope of change or the fantasy of a second chance. Hoovering may also work because it can come after a period of loneliness, after the breakup with the narcissist, or when you might have slid into a period of euphoric recall. The hoovering may also occur at a time of transition. For example, maybe you got into a new relationship after this break or breakup from the narcissistic relationship, and then the narcissistic person shows up again. And it really comes down to a case of the devil you know, right? Some people even make the mistake during the hoovering phase that you will finally get your chance to lay it all out to them. Share your feelings about what happened in the relationship. Share all your grievances with them. Probably won't work. If you do that, you're more likely to face down more gaslighting, or at the very least, some manipulative, oh baby, let's not bring the past up anymore. I am committed to you as a new person. That kind of nonsense, right? Hoovering can also be part of a fishing expedition. Remember that control is a key part of the narcissistic relationship dynamic. So for the narcissistic person, it is the question of whether they have the power to reel you in again. It's about the game, not you. While we often use the term hoovering to talk about romantic relationships, and that's probably where it most applies, it can also apply to family relationships. You may go no contact on a family event like a wedding, funeral, or family illness forces people back in touch and back in contact with you. And you kind of get pulled back in. Or a beloved family member wants to see you, and the other folks are there, and it all starts up again. They are not going to turn it off. What can hoovering look like? Well, remember, hoovering can look like a text or an email that kind of comes out of nowhere. The more surprise value it has, the more powerful it is as a hoover. It could be a randomly running into them somewhere and then starting up the conversation again. And like I said, by the way, this may not be as random as it seems. A DM or a post on something on your social media. It can look like an attempt to reach out to you through someone else you know. That's sort of a triangulation kind of a hoover. It could be a long letter where they pour it all out and tell you everything you wanted to hear while you were together. It can be using time they get to have with you. So for example, an example of that would be at the drop-off times when you drop off your children with them. They may start trying to flirt with you or win you over again. It could be pulling you back into conversation again by reaching out to you at a time of difficulty. For example, someone you both know died or is sick. It could be pulling you into conversations again by reaching out when there's some really good news for one of you, or for someone you know, like someone you know has a baby or something like that. In more extreme cases, hoovering can be a full court press, like little daily gifts and little messages that may break your resolve and make you smile. It doesn't feel like stalking. You don't want to call it stalking, even though it kind of is, but it sort of feels cute, and you sort of start falling back into it again. It's a tricky dynamic, and it's not unusual for people to get hoovered back multiple times before they really see it. And in the best case scenarios, after each hoover break cycle, there is less time before you get out again. Sometimes, let's say you broke up with them. Then it's not unusual for them to hoover. And their hoovering works, and you start things up again together, and then they break up with you. It's a sort of them needing to have the last word and be able to walk around saying, I broke up with them. Another mistake people make during the hoover is that you might feel powerful for a little while. All that new attention and effort can almost fill you with a sense of power that you definitely didn't have during the relationship. But that sense of power is short-lived, and before you can say gaslight, the toxic patterns will start again. But those early days of hoovering, where they're trying to get in touch with you, where you feel that power, like, I don't need to respond right away, that power you didn't have in the relationship before, can be very intoxicating. Hoovering is a complex dynamic because it can bring up lots of shame for people who will often be sort of secretive when they are first being hoovered because they don't want friends or other people, especially other people who helped them through the breakup, to know that they're back in touch with someone who had once caused so much misery. So the early phase of hoovering can have the intrigue and excitement of an illicit affair, but the danger of an isolated relationship. When I talk with survivors, I am very careful, because I really don't think it's shameful, but I'm very careful to ensure that we never use shameful language around hoovering, because it's a very normal part of grief and loss and trauma bonding. And because it is obvious why all of us are vulnerable to being hoovered. And I'm convinced we learn something each time we are hoovered, not only about them and the relationship, but more importantly about ourselves. But the shame of being hoovered can leave people feeling like they failed, or like the sense of, I broke no contact, or that you're somehow weak. It's not true. And if you were the one who left the relationship, who initiated the breakup, any lingering pity or guilt you might have for the narcissistic person may lead you to resume contact if they were to reach out to be nice. Are there things you can do to be more hoover-proof? Yep, and here are 10 of them. Number one, know what hoovering it is. Number one, know what hoovering is and how it plays a part in narcissistic relationship dynamics. That way, you aren't so surprised when it happens and understand what it is. Knowing what it is can help you see it less romantically and magically and more as the tactic that it is. Number two, the most dangerous time for a hoover is actually as you heal and get a little ways down the healing track. You may be feeling a little better, doing less ruminating, and the awfulness of the relationship may fade a little. You may feel like we're both adults who shared our lives together. I can respond and be okay because you've healed. But then because there's a certain toxic power to the relationship, you may still get pulled back in. Listen, folks. You may not hear from someone, and hoovering can show up 10 years down the road. So be aware that as you get stronger, it's also possible that you become newly attractive all over again to the narcissistic person. The bigger you become, the more interesting it is to break you down, right? And what I'm going to say is more sadistic. They can't stand to watch you soar. So hoovering you is an opportunity for them to tie sandbags to that rising balloon that is you. Number three, Clean up your social media, especially in the early phase of a breakup. I know it's the hardest thing in the world to not look at their social media, but if you can avoid it, avoid it. It is literally the fastest track to healing. If you can't avoid it, then at least adjust social media settings so either they can't see yours or they can't comment on it. Because DMs and social media comments are such a common space of hoovering. And we don't think of it, we almost sort of play it down. Oh, it's just a comment, especially when things are fresh. Though I am a fan of this as a long-term strategy, right? Closing those spaces down as much as possible. Social media spaces makes you very hoover-proof. The more they see you healing, the more likely they're going to hoover you and pull you back. Number 4, shut down people who want to tell your ex or whomever it is you're distanced from how you're doing, okay? Or want to tell you about how your ex is doing. I know it sounds extreme, but it is risky to hear how your ex is doing in the early phases of healing and to start replanting that weed of rumination. If someone brings it up and says, hey, you want to hear something about your ex? I know I'm asking you to hold back 50 wild horses with your teeth, but if you can find it in yourself to say, no, I really don't, this may literally be one of the best hoover-proof tools that there is. I got to tell you, I once used this and it was a lifesaver for me. Number 5, call a friend if you feel tempted to respond to a hoover message. Think of it as calling a friend if you feel tempted to spend money or have a drink when you shouldn't. So that friend can talk you through it or at least distract you from it for a minute. That conversation may be enough to distract you and pull you off the path of reaching out to the ex. And the friend may also be a clear-headed reminder of how bad the relationship really was. Number 6, look at your ick list again. You better have one and look at it. All the awful, terrible things that they said and did in the relationship and that happened in the relationship. Sometimes just seeing that is enough to say, oh, hell no, I am not responding to this. I do not need this again. I am not starting up anything close to this game again. Number 7, change their name in your phone. If you haven't already blocked their number, change their name. And then when their name comes up as do not respond to this fool, it is a good and sobering reminder. And you can throw in some cursing and poop and devil emojis for good measure to remind you to not answer this call or respond to this text. Number 8, do not answer or respond to unknown numbers, ever. Narcissistic people will use a fake number to reach out. If it's important and someone's calling from an unknown number, they will leave a message. But not answering can save you the mess of hearing their voice again. Same thing with texts from unknown numbers. And don't respond saying, who's this? No. Number 9, avoid being hoovered in silence. If you have started slipping back in, don't keep it a secret. Talking it out can be enough to cut it off at the pass. Hoovering is quite powerful when it happens in isolation and is a secret. And listen, number 10, becoming hoover-proof can sometimes happen by getting hoovered a few times. I mean, getting pulled back into it and seeing it more and more with wiser and wiser eyes. And maybe after the third hoover, you say, oh boy, do I see it this time, and I am not going to respond next time. And in that case, like I said, maybe the ultimate way to become hoover-proof is to actually get hoovered a few times. It's a bit like the hair of the dog. So you can see that nothing really changed if you get hoovered again and again and again. So the key is, if you are going to get hoovered, keep your eyes wide open, because that may be the ultimate way to become hoover-proof. Thanks again.